Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. A massive story is breaking from The Guardian this morning with regards potential takeovers from the Middle East. It's not QSI, it's not Sheikh Jassim. We think it might be Staveley and her consortium. The Guardian, a journalistic integrity-based outlet. I think you could argue it certainly comes from stronger sources than the majority of stories I'll put out for you. But this one is saying that Daniel Levy will remain in charge if the deal can be struck for a number of years in what looks like a phased buyout of Tottenham Hotspur by the Middle East. We have the story for you to go through. If you'd like some other takes on it, we've also, Johnny and I have delivered a video over on Football Inc. He was out on location over in the Middle East, and we thought we'd get a video done on there first, but now you've got just a solo take. Let's look at the story, guys, before we get into it. If you do enjoy the channel, then hit the subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Hit the notification bell. Only 10% of you have hit the notification bell. Only 63% of you are subscribed. And let's get into it. Drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on the story in the section beneath, guys. Daniel Levy may continue to run Spurs in potential Qatari takeover plan. Prospective buyers keen to retain the chairman's expertise. Interesting. In what? We'll find out. Fans chanted Levy out during the FA Cup loss at Aston Villa. Daniel Levy could be given the chance to stay on at Tottenham by a consortium seeking to buy the club. The Guardian has learned that a group of Qatari investors are willing to give Levy a long-term contract to continue running Spurs as executive chairman. Retaining Levy would be a controversial move given the antipathy towards the chairman from many Tottenham fans, but the investors are keen to retain his expertise. They want control of Spurs, but the proposed takeover could take the form of a phased buyout. Under one model being considered by the investors, Levy would be offered a management contract to run the club, which would remain in place even if ENIC, that owns 86.91% of Tottenham, become a minority shareholder. Let's pause on the story for a second and speculate onto that. Is that because Daniel Levy has insisted that if ENIC want out and Joe Lewis has had enough? That man is getting towards the end of his days, surely, an old gentleman at the time being, for the time being. And he's got his obviously legal issues that are probably in the past now. He's handed over the control of the club to the trust, the family trust that we'll get to in a second during the story. But Daniel Levy always seems to have this notion surrounding him with regards to takeover that he doesn't want to let go. He wants to remain in charge. He can't do that without the support of Joe Lewis, who is the money behind Tottenham, and of course ENIC above them, Tavistock Group, who apparently someone keeps telling me, I think it's Johnny keeps telling me, that Daniel Levy's son is in fact in charge of Tavistock Group, which is the overarching owner of ENIC. So it's an interesting one. But either way, Daniel Levy apparently not willing to relinquish control. He likes his juicy bonuses. He likes his lovely salary. And of course, this man is a control freak, rightly or wrongly, as much as some of you, many of you, don't share my opinion that I think he is he's rightly criticised for a lot of the issues on the pitch. I think he is wrongly put into this bucket that he's the worst thing since sliced bread, a parasite, and that Tottenham can only move in the right direction in a better upward trajectory if he was to go. I don't subscribe to that necessarily. I think that you have to look at each potential new owner, new scenario on its merit, and that's what we're going to do here. Let's continue. Levy has been the most influential figure at Tottenham since 2001, when ENIC bought 30% of the club from Alan Sugar before gaining full control 6 years later. Under Levy's leadership, Spurs' financial position has been transformed, with the 63-year-old masterminding the building of their new stadium and establishing Tottenham as one of their richest clubs in Europe with an annual income of more than £500 million. Tottenham have been open about the fact they are seeking outside investment, with Levy saying last year that the club needed, quote, a significant increase in its equity base. The financial services group Rothschild has been appointed to advise on investment talks, but there is also outside interest in a takeover. Sources at the club insist they are not currently involved in negotiations on a takeover. Now, legally speaking, and as a duty of care to the shareholders, they do have to disclose that. As I mentioned yesterday on We Are Tottenham TV, the specifics of the timings of those sorts of things, I'm not entirely sure on how it works with companies that have shareholder bases that extend beyond just the overarching owner. And in the case of Tottenham, they have 30,000 minority and micro shareholders. And they used to be listed on the alternative investment market. Now, because they are sort of delisted but still operate within a shareholder model, I'm unclear as to when and how these sorts of disclosures have to take place? Do they have to take place within certain reporting windows? Do they have to take place essentially the moment that there is some meaningful discussions? Do they have to take place, and do they have to be disseminated to you via emails? Do they have to take place via social media? I doubt that part of the story is true, but in any event, they do have to disclose. And according to this report, and of course we are aware that whilst we are familiar with the idea that they have had discussions in terms of takeovers rather than minority investments, that has always been a consistent theme, that is not part of the plan. Primarily, I would assume because Daniel Levy doesn't want to let go of Tottenham. He wants to keep his finger in the pie from a financial perspective and obviously from a control perspective. But as I said a minute ago, if Joe Lewis and ENIC have moved away their interest and certainly they're willing to put money into the club, but Daniel Levy needs funding either for the hotel and the other things that are happening with regards to properties and apartments being built and the other plans that they have around the high road and the gentrification model. Then at the moment, without those sources of funding, it's difficult to know how they can achieve both all of those things and also the maintaining of the consistent application of I guess relevant ambition in the guise of the footballing team. We'll continue. Tottenham have been the subject of long-standing interest from potential investors in America and the Middle East, but no one has met the £3.75 billion valuation. The identity of the Qatari bidders is unclear, but The Guardian has been told they are private individuals rather than the government-backed Qatar Sports Investment or Sheikh Jassim, who tried to buy United 2 years ago. In recent years, Levy has held talks with several Qatari entities without closing a deal. In 2016, Tottenham entered negotiations with QSI about a naming rights deal for the new stadium, and 2 years ago, QSI approached the club about a minority investment. Because of QSI's overarching ownership of Paris Saint-Germain, the rules regarding multi-club ownership would prevent QSI from owning anything more than 25%, which is the maximum allowable in a minority takeover or a minority investment in a football club that participates in the same competitions. And of course, Tottenham's propensity to qualify for the Champions League and Paris Saint-Germain's ever existing presence within it as the biggest club in France would obviously make that 25% the threshold. However, as I always say, these rules are a moving jigsaw. They're a moving target. The goalposts get moved all of the time. And this notion that there's a Chinese wall between two clubs who can participate in the same league, like the Red Bull model they have in Salzburg in Austria and with Leipzig in Germany, well, it doesn't really meet the smell test for me when just because they have two different management groups in charge, yet they are owned by the same overarching entity. I don't really understand how it is reasonable for that model to exist with those particular clubs, when if you look at the history of those two teams, they have a higher propensity to trade traditionally one direction, but it does go both ways. Salzburg and Leipzig, I think, have got a higher relationship of player trading between the two clubs than any other two clubs in Europe. So this idea that there's a Chinese wall between the two, I think, is laughable. But in any event, as the rules currently stand, 25% would be the most that a minority investment can allow. Although having said that, the current UEFA chairman has suggested in an interview with Gary Neville in 2023 that there are intentions to loosen the rules regarding multi-club ownership and regarding investment from third-party sources. We'll continue with the story. The former Newcastle director Amanda Staveley, who brokered the Saudi takeover at St James's Park 4 years ago, held talks with the Middle Eastern group about making an offer last year. In 2023, the FT reported that a bid was being prepared by the Iranian-American billionaire Jan Najafi. We brought that to you here on Spurs Talk Show and on Sean Butler TV. Tottenham fans chanted Levy out during much of Sunday's FA Cup fourth-round defeat at Aston Villa. For all the criticism of Levy, he has approved a £550 million net spend on players since the new stadium opened 6 years ago. I think also, is it £1.8 billion has been spent on players, I believe, over Daniel Levy's tenure, something around that number. Since 2022, ENIC and Tottenham have been controlled by the billionaire Joe Lewis's family trust, which is managed by two independent professional trustees on behalf of beneficiaries that do not include Joe Lewis. There goes the end of the story. So in terms of like the story itself, as I say, I would personally make the argument that the Joe Lewis, the Guardian itself is an area of journalistic integrity that I think is more palatable, more believable than many of the articles that I bring to your attention. But there's not entirely that much new information, apart from the Guardian has been led to believe that there is interest, and that it would include Daniel Levy staying on. So obviously it begs the question of those that are Levy out, and anyone but him will do. Are you okay with Qatar coming in if it means that Daniel Levy is and remains an ever-present part of the makeup of Tottenham Hotspur, at least for the time being? It doesn't necessarily go into how long that relationship would last. It does say that there would be a phased buyout. So initially a certain amount of money with a view to maybe staggering more investment over the years. Now that obviously can be seen as a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. From an injection of capital perspective, obviously it depends on the interest rates. These things are, by and large, despite these people having massive amounts of money, it would be imprudent of them to not probably attach debt. They may fund the purchase or they may fund the overall investment, but a lot of the time there will be debt attached to it. If you look at the likes of Newcastle United, the rumours are that despite having the PIF fund in charge, who I think have got $750 give or take $1 billion investment pool to dip into when it comes to the amount of money, $1.5 billion is speculated to be the number for their new stadium. Well, there's a reluctance from the Saudi PIF fund to actually fund that without debt. And so it's a method for these people to get an initial return on investment from a source that is, a good cash generation asset, but also a way that they can see some sort of ROI in the short term, as much as they would do, hopefully, from a longer term sell on in the future. As I've said to you 1,000 times, the low hanging fruit for Tottenham from an investment perspective has mainly been taken by Daniel Levy, who took the club from, what was it, £60 million valuation up to 3.75 billion. We do have £700 million, give or take, of debt still on the club's books, at mainly at relatively low interest rates. In fact, very, very good interest rates. One of the areas of Daniel Levy's expertise does actually move always towards debt restructuring. There's probably very few other people as clever as him in regards how to negotiate long-term debt structuring, which is a good thing. Now, obviously, when those debts were negotiated back in maybe 10 years ago for the money that was lent for the stadium rebuild and for the Northumberland redevelopment project, the interest rates generally, the base rate, the Bank of England base rate in the UK was about 0.5%. That's not the case anymore. It's more around 4.5% to 5% now, depending on when you're watching this. Now, they are moving back down again, but following COVID, following the war in Ukraine, following the incredible amount of money that was pumped into the system, I think 45% of all of the money that has ever been printed in the entirety and the history of the world since the US dollar took over the petrodollar and replaced gold as the reserve currency of the world. Well, that was printed during COVID. So an incredible amount of money flushing and flooded around the system. And of course, that creates inflation, horrendous inflation. Just look at the price of eggs, for example, on your local Tesco's receipt. And of course, the way to kind of curtail that, one of the options available to the various banks, the national banks around the countries of the world, would be to raise interest rates, right? So it takes money out of or tries to disincentivize reckless spend. So with that kind of coming down a little bit now, it makes it a little bit more palatable. As I've mentioned many times on this channel, I do think if the interest rates do continue to decline, you will still see more and more interest in Premier League clubs from either private equity in the West, in America, or from some of the areas of the East that are still yet to be sort of gobbled up by other entities. We shall see. With regards to the Qatar consortium, it does also beg the question: how do you feel if you're sensitive to what's happening in the Middle East? As a half Irish, half English guy who's Christian denomination, I don't really have a dog in that particular fight, nor do I have any particular deep understanding of the complexities of that relationship. What I am familiar with, at least, is that I believe there is an accusation that one of the leaders of the side, that Hamas, they of course were living in Qatar. So depending on how you feel about that stuff, and not that I really want to get stuck into that conversation, but of course it is a consideration. If you are someone that is sympathetic to one particular side or the other, how do you feel about that? Does it really bother you if it means that you get what you want, which is new money coming into the club and new ownership? But of course, you're still going to be stuck under this particular relationship with Daniel Levy. So if you really do want him gone, you might have to shake hands with some sort of compromise in your own mind, because it doesn't feel like Daniel Levy is willing to relinquish control of this club anytime soon. So would you be okay with him staying on at the club in some vision, some guys, if it meant that you did get more money coming in. As I said at the start, it's unclear what the money would be used for. Would it be used for the hotel? Excuse me. Excuse me. Would it be used for the hotel? Would it be used for the rest of the Northumberland Park development plan? Would it be used for the properties? Would it be used just for footballing activities? It's unclear. What I would say is that the absence of that investment might look like some of the money that could be used for the footballing team that the stadium generates currently may be redirected to finish off some of the models around the hotels and things. And so it doesn't really matter which way it goes. If the money was to come in and go into the pool of fund for Tottenham, then maybe some of the money that the stadium generates could be redirected into the hotels, or it could be brought in to fund the hotels so that the money that the club generates can remain entirely for the football team. Either way, I would imagine that investment coming in, whether it's a £500 million initial slice of the pie, will get X amount, maybe 10% of the football club. And with that, that money should be able to go in the right direction, which is why I don't believe this will happen anytime soon, but I do believe that very soon you will see Tottenham make a record signing transfer, and hopefully you will see a new highest earner at the club. I do subscribe to the notion that the statistics do point you in the direction of the teams that spend the most money, generally speaking, on wages and on transfer fees, have the highest propensity for success. It's a logical consistency. It doesn't always work out that way, but you can make the assumption that with spending more, you get better players, and with better players, you have better outcomes. With regards this particular option, look, it's one option to be explored. The others, if you do want to go towards the West, where you have maybe Daniel Levy turning his head towards the idea of relationships with American investors, may also behoove him in his pursuit of NFL relationships, etc. Those sorts of things traditionally come with debt. Those sorts of things traditionally come with people that are looking for different ways to return ROI. And if they are borrowing money to then place into the purchase, they don't have the benefit of being able to fund the purchase without debt, but charge interest on the transfer itself, on the transaction itself, rather. And so, people from the Middle East may be able to see some of the ROI by raising the money and then charging interest on the debt that's leveraged, whereas private equity don't have that same benefit. And so to them, they're looking for other areas in which to do so, which may turn towards cost-cutting and efficiencies. Look at what Sir Jim Ratcliffe is doing at Manchester United. Look at what the Friedkin Group will be doing at Everton. And look at what other teams, other owners that are invested in places like Crystal Palace, for example, with John Textor and the Blackstone guy, what they are doing with regards to how they can eke out ROI in worlds where most of the low-hanging fruit is already taken. There are, of course, other areas to come with regards, in all likelihood, higher money, higher revenue streams coming from media takeover or media extension deals. In the case of the Premier League, whilst they have structured their deals with regards Sky and TNT for the relative short-term future, they will also have to renegotiate some of their third-party relationships and contracts with media groups in Australia and the Middle East and America, and also, of course, the Asian market over the coming years. And so there's expected to be increases in revenues in that regard. And I've always mentioned that the Netflix for sports concept that probably won't come in until 2030 at earliest, but that would in all likelihood see a 3 to 4 times increase in the amount of money that each team gets paid for their media rights, in the case of that kind of streaming service that is probably the best and most juiciest fruit yet to pick. Either way, it's interesting, guys. How do you feel about Daniel Levy staying on with his expertise? And it's the last part of that story that I'll get back to. I'm not sure I can bring it back up here. I can. Is how does this, in the first paragraph, it says, they're willing to give Levy a long-term contract to continue running Spurs as executive chairman. It will the antipathy towards the chairman from many Spurs fans will be is a factor here to consider. But the investors are keen to retain his expertise. His expertise in what? What is it that they are looking for his expertise in? Is it his expertise in footballing matters? If so, large portions of you will raise your eyebrows, roll your eyes, and say he's a failure in that regard. There's no expertise there. It's amateur hour at the bar. And I don't necessarily disagree. He's an expert in raising valuations, but his negotiation style, I think, is completely wrong for footballing activities whereby you only have a certain amount of people to deal with, vendors, trading partners, whatever, and you have to go back to that table several times. So burning bridges with a zero-sum game approach to negotiations is stupid, and he's been known for doing that over the years. Also, of course, his ability to negotiate his hard line, which is my price or not at all, wastes time and has been a sore point, I guess, for many people's appraisals of him as a footballing chairman. If it comes to the expertise that they want to retain with regards to non-footballing matters, then I can understand the reason why. He's very, very good at being able to eke out the value in other areas of the pitch. But if you're having an investor coming in that doesn't proclaim to have expertise in those factors and likely won't have expertise in footballing matters either, then are we maybe shaking hands here with a scenario where the devil you don't know could be a lot worse than the devil you do? Because where's the value other than in the financial injections of capital that likely will come with debt, and not debt that is anywhere near as uninfectious and prohibitive towards spend as the previous debt we have on the books, because of the fortuitous timing that debt was structured at versus what you would have to pay now. If it's 4.5% as the national bank rate, the base rate, then anything that happens in private commerce will be at a far higher point than that. And do you really want to get lumbered with a large stake at 8 or 9% interest rates? I would say no. Naming rights deals haven't been achieved yet. So is that where they want to come in for his expertise? I don't know what expertise means in this regard. It's a little bit of a scary black hole in the conversation. Either scenario doesn't really bode too well in my mind, but I'm on board with the concept of a new owner. I just need to see more detail on this particular story. Whilst I trust the Guardian as being legitimate in their intent, it doesn't really give me enough to be able to find out what the hell is going on. And so therefore I will park this one until more details drop. But let me know your thoughts, guys. What do you think? Are you okay with it? Are you anti it anyway? What about the political implications? I don't really want to get stuck into it. If you guys do in the comments, be respectful of each other's opinions. I know everyone's got a very, very hard set of baked in opinions on that stuff. It's not something that I understand, so I'm going to steer well clear of it. But I am interested to know whether or not you generally think it's a problem or not for the kind of that political stuff. Are you okay with future debt being higher than what we currently pay? Are you okay with Daniel Levy staying if it means that eventually Enoch, Joe Lewis, and everybody else, including Daniel Levy, will be sunset? If it takes 5 years, is that okay with you? Do you expect any other outcome other than Daniel Levy being a part of this football club for the next few years, regardless of what happens? Protests coming up on Sunday. I'm really intrigued to see how many people turn up to that. It's going to be a fascinating insight into where the public-facing section of the fans sit, rather than just what we see on social media. I do wish you all well with it. I will leave it there, guys. Like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know your thoughts. And as always,